In a striking escalation of rhetoric that underscores the growing tension between the United States and Iran, President Donald J. Trump issued an unusually forceful warning to Tehran that the United States would come to the rescue of peaceful protesters if Iranian authorities resort to killing demonstrators, a statement that has reverberated across diplomatic circles in capitals from Washington to Tehran and has deepened concerns about the potential for miscalculation in an already fraught geopolitical landscape, where domestic unrest in Iran intersects with long-standing U.S.-Iran antagonism. Trump's comments were made in response to days of nationwide protests in Iran that began as demonstrations against economic hardship, food price increases, and unemployment, but have quickly swelled into broader expressions of anger at Iran's political leadership, with social media videos and independent reports indicating that thousands of Iranians have taken to the streets in cities such as Tehran, Mashhad, Isfahan, Shiraz, and Tabriz, demanding reforms and expressing frustration over corruption, inflation, and restricted political freedoms, conditions exacerbated by years of crippling sanctions reimposed by the United States under Trump's maximum pressure campaign designed to isolate Tehran economically and constrain its regional influence. And in his remarks, the president underscored that the United States is locked and loaded and ready to go should Iranian forces cross what he described as a red line by killing unarmed demonstrators, a phrase that immediately drew sharp reactions from Iranian officials who denounced the statement as blatant interference in Iran's internal affairs, and warned that any external involvement would be met with resolute defense of national sovereignty, language that reflects Tehran's long-standing position of rejecting foreign criticism of its handling of domestic issues and accusing Washington and its allies of fomenting unrest to weaken the Islamic Republic, accusations that Iran's leadership repeated in state media outlets while the country's Supreme National Security Council condemned the U.S. posture and vowed to protect the security and stability of the nation against external threats, a response that highlights the delicate balance Tehran seeks to maintain between suppressing dissent and avoiding further international confrontation, even as security forces have been reported to use batons, tear gas, and live ammunition against protesters in several regions, leading to multiple deaths and hundreds of injuries according to human rights organizations monitoring the unrest, developments that have alarmed Western governments and advocacy groups who have urged Iranian authorities to respect the rights of peaceful demonstrators and exercise restraint, with European Union foreign policy officials expressing concern over the violence and calling for de-escalation, while the United Nations Human Rights Office has issued statements emphasizing the right to peaceful protest and urging all parties to avoid measures that could exacerbate tensions. Trump's warning marked one of the most direct public threats toward Iran over internal unrest in recent years, signaling a shift from predominantly economic and nuclear-focused pressure to overt political support for protesters, a stance that analysts say reflects the Trump administration's broader strategy of undermining the Iranian government by capitalizing on domestic dissatisfaction, but which also carries significant risks of inflaming nationalist sentiment and strengthening hardliner positions in Tehran that argue for resisting foreign pressure and cracking down on dissent as a matter of sovereignty and security. U.S. national security advisors have framed the president's comments as an attempt to offer moral support to protesters and deter further bloodshed, noting that the United States has long championed human rights globally and that the safety of peaceful demonstrators should be protected. Yet critics within the United States and abroad have cautioned that invoking the possibility of U.S. intervention could be interpreted by Iranian leaders and military commanders as a threat of force, potentially justifying a harsher response to protests, or even accelerating confrontations in other arenas such as the Persian Gulf, where U.S. naval forces maintain a significant presence to secure shipping lanes and deter hostile actions by Iranian vessels and proxy groups, a dynamic that has already resulted in a series of tense encounters between U.S. and Iranian forces over the past decade, including drone shootdowns, tanker seizures, and drone attacks on facilities linked to U.S. interests. The backdrop to the current protests and Trump's warning includes years of deteriorating economic conditions in Iran, driven by U.S. sanctions targeting key sectors such as oil exports, banking, and trade, measures that have dramatically reduced government revenues and accelerated inflation, squeezing the Iranian populace and leading to shortages of foreign goods and basic necessities, conditions that have eroded public confidence in the government's ability to manage the economy and sparked waves of protest activity across multiple cities. While previous demonstrations in Iran have occasionally prompted violent crackdowns, the scale and persistence of the current unrest have surprised many observers, with the movement drawing in diverse segments of society including students, workers, and families who have historically been more cautious about confronting the state, a development that has raised questions in diplomatic and intelligence communities about the potential for sustained domestic pressure to force political concessions or even shifts in Tehran's policy directions. Against this backdrop, Trump's comments came during a period in which U.S.-Iran relations were already strained by disputes over Iran's nuclear program, its support for proxy groups in the Middle East, and sanctions enforcement, tensions that have periodically pushed the two nations to the brink of direct military confrontation. In 2025, the United States carried out strikes against Iranian nuclear facilities, significantly damaging enrichment infrastructure and prompting a forceful denouncement from Tehran, which accused Washington of aggression and vowed to retaliate if further attacks occurred, a tit-for-tat pattern that has underscored the volatility of the bilateral relationship and heightened fears among geopolitical analysts that missteps or miscommunication could lead to broader conflict, a concern reflected in closed-door briefings on Capitol Hill where lawmakers from both parties have sought updates from intelligence and defense officials on the rapidly evolving situation in Iran and the implications of strong U.S. rhetoric regarding internal protests. International response to Trump's warning has been mixed, with several allied countries in Europe expressing support for the protection of human rights while urging caution and diplomacy to avoid escalation, and some Middle Eastern nations urging de-escalation and restraint from all sides, reflecting the complex set of interests that global actors have in the stability of Iran and the broader region. Russia and China, two permanent members of the United Nations Security Council with long-standing ties to Tehran, have criticized the United States for what they term meddling in Iran's internal affairs and stressed the importance of respecting national sovereignty, remarks that align with their broader opposition to unilateral U.S. pressure tactics and underscore the geopolitical fault lines that often emerge in international responses to crises involving Iran and Western powers. With protests continuing and no clear end in sight, questions remain about how Iranian authorities will navigate the dual pressures of domestic dissent and foreign scrutiny, and how the United States will calibrate its rhetoric and policy actions to support peaceful protest without inadvertently provoking a severe backlash. Human rights advocates are calling for international monitoring of the situation on the ground in Iran and accountability for any excessive use of force, while U.S. diplomats and intelligence officials work behind the scenes to assess the potential ramifications of Trump's statement and explore diplomatic pathways that might reduce tensions and open channels for dialogue on issues ranging from human rights to nuclear compliance and regional security, a delicate balance that underscores the complexity of modern U.S.-Iran relations, where domestic events in Tehran can have far-reaching implications for strategic stability in the Middle East and beyond. And as the world watches the situation unfold, the pronouncements from Washington and Tehran signal that the coming days and weeks will be critical in determining the trajectory of one of the most consequential foreign policy flashpoints of the moment, one that intertwines questions of national sovereignty, human rights, geopolitical rivalry, and the enduring challenge of managing tensions between two nations with a long and fractious history.